Morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
How's everybody? Good to see everybody. We survived. Hey, listen, our daughter, their snow was out until yesterday morning. Or their electric was out. The snow was in. The electric was out at their house until yesterday morning. Of course, they lost everything in the refrigerator, everything in their freezer. So they went out this morning and restocked the refrigerator, and she wrote us at 4:30 and said, our power just went out again.
Oh, no.
I said, well, there you go. No good deed goes unpunished.
Tell them to put it outside and it'll be fine.
Yeah, they said don't do that. You know, they haven't had classes this week at Lipscomb because nobody can get to the campus. That area is so blocked with tree falls that they can't even get vehicles into the campus. If you don't know, Lipscomb sits in a very old residential part of Nashville that is all great big old 100-year-old trees. And so when an ice storm hits, it's a disaster area. It's like driving up on the back roads of the mountain. So anyway, hey, last week we looked at this passage, these few verses in 1 Peter 2, where Peter talked about the relationship between Christians and the government. And we noted the fact that, you know, we are in different situations than what they were, obviously. Different form of government, different day and time, different customs, all of that kind of thing. And yet, there are always principles there that override any situation. God's will is universal. And the first rule that always governs everything we do as Christians is our first loyalty is to Jesus. Period. Our first loyalty is to Jesus, over and above anything and everything else. Number two, the first rule that we try to live by is we want to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. We want to hold God's people together. And Mark and I, not Mark Ledford, but Mark Farley and I were talking about after class last week. You know, Mark was saying that as tribal as our society is right now in their political views, this is an open door for Christians to teach people how to work together, how to be forgiving, how to tolerate each other, how to work with each other, even when we disagree on some things. And he got me to thinking about that, and that's a good point. That is a very important point. Because I dare say if we went around this room, we would probably get a fairly consistent political viewpoint, I think, among most of us. Fred sent me last week. It got Fred's interest up, so he started sending me surveys that have been done over the last 15 or 20 years on the political leanings versus Republican versus Democrat of the major religious groups in America, not just Christian groups, although they went through all the different evangelicals, the mainline churches, the big churches, the catechetical churches, all the different kinds of churches, but also the Islamic groups, the Jewish groups. And, you know, the numbers were fairly consistent that among conservative Christian people, the leaning toward the right and toward the Republican point of view is between 70 and 90%, depending on the particular group. And I thought that was interesting. But I also started thinking about that 10 to 30% that continued to be a part of those groups and yet were clearly not politically sympathetic to their views. And I thought to myself, there's where the test comes, isn't it? Is in that 20, 30, 40, or 50%. And if you look at the other side of the coin, other kinds of churches, the numbers were flip-flopped. You know, mostly left-leaning, but you still have the 20 or 30% leaning to the right. That creates interesting tensions. And you know, the thing is, in the church, I don't know about you, I've got enough to deal with anyway. Amen. Without having to deal with all that stuff. I think the most important thing, and I'll say this, you may agree or disagree with it, I think that morally, the church must be vocal. When it's a moral issue, that's a right and wrong thing. And I think the church has not only the right, but the responsibility to take a moral stand on issues of right to life, issues of sexuality, issues of marriage, and things of that sort. But on a lot of the other issues that are involved, I think the church needs to keep its nose out of that and let its members believe what they want to believe and go where they want to go with it. And it bothers me that I see so many politicians nowadays trying to co-opt churches into their camp. I think number one, it is unethical on their part to do that. I understand why. I think it is unethical for them to do that, and I'll be honest with you, I think it is equally unethical for the leaders of churches to allow it to happen. Because I can't imagine anything that would be more divisive than to have somebody come and basically co-opt the loyalty of your church to their side of the thinking when 20, 30, 40% of your members are going to automatically be alienated by that. How are you going to build unity? And besides that, the things that we divide over in those situations are not the Ephesians 4 things that God says we should be united on. Okay? You don't have to agree with everything the government does. You don't even have to agree with almost anything the government does to obey what Peter says here. Let's look at this real quick. We went through all of this last week. I just want us to look at the verses, and then we're going to go to the discussion questions. And I've already told Fred anything that is controversial, we're going to defer to Fred. He's going to solve it just instantly. So, we got all three elders in here, so they can just stand and make a pronouncement, and that'll settle it all. No, that's okay. Listen to what Peter says. He says, for the Lord's sake, and again, I want to stress, the first thing Peter says is, the Lord comes first. Anything I tell you about your responsibility toward the government, how you act in a pagan society that is basically anti-Christian, aggressively, I want you to do it for the sake of the Lord. That's your standard. That has to come first. Submit to all human authority, whether the king is head of state or the officials he's appointed. For the king has sent them to punish those who do wrong, honor those who do right. Now, if we lived in Nazi Germany, we might question that. Can a government pervert that mission? Yeah. God's basic desire is that mankind be organized and civilized and that they have basic standards of right and wrong that government enforces. Not all governments do that. Let's go to the next verse. It is God's will. Notice again, it is God's will that your honorable lives should silence those ignorant people who make false accusations against you. For you are free, yet you're God's slaves, so don't use your freedom as an excuse to do evil. Again, and he said this earlier, live the kind of lives that can't be criticized. Okay? That would suggest law-abiding. That would suggest highly moral, highly ethical, respectful of others. Those are the kind of things that nobody's going to argue with that. Nobody's going to look at that and say, oh, well, there they go. And I'm going to tell you something. A number of Christian groups in our culture lately have not done a very good job of that. On either side of the spectrum. They haven't done a very good job sometimes. You know, these people that carry these signs and stand at the funeral of slain military people holding up signs that say, "You deserve to die because America supports queers." Is that a Christian witness to the society? Is that, what in the world is that? You know, even if I did not support that lifestyle morally, I wouldn't support that approach to criticizing it either. That's just cruel. And, you know, I think of Jesus turning over the tables in the temple. I wonder what he would have done to the people on that sidewalk. You know? Respect everyone. I love this verse. Good summary statement. Respect everyone. Everyone. Love the family of believers. Notice the higher level. You respect everyone. You love your brothers and sisters. They're family. Fear God. Respect the king. Respect the king. Fear God. He's the man. Even the king will answer to God. So if he's a lousy king, if he's immoral, if he's unethical, he'll pay. God will settle that. So, here are our questions. And this is where we kind of ended last week. We kind of ended right where we should be starting, right? So let's think about this. What does Peter mean when he says we are to submit to government authorities? What does that mean, to submit to government authorities? Are there other things we're supposed to submit to? Anybody? What?
Abide by the laws. Just abide by the laws.
Okay, so submit would be to abide by the laws as long as they don't compromise your faith. If there's a law that says you can't worship on Sunday, you can't worship Jesus on Sunday, you can't be a good citizen and a good Christian. You can't be a good citizen of this kingdom and be a good citizen of God's kingdom at the same time. In that case, you're set up to have to make a choice. But, you know, how many laws in this country do you think you would need to violate right now because they compromise your walk with God? How many laws in this country?
Zero.
Who said zero? Thank you, Mark. I can't think of a law in this country that would force me. There are a number of laws in this country that I do not agree with, that I do not accept either politically or morally. There are some laws I don't agree with, but you can be a Christian in this country without having to cross the line easily. So what does it mean to submit? It doesn't mean to accept everything they believe, their whole political system, their belief system, their politics, their philosophy of government. That's not what he's talking about, is he? He's talking about keeping your nose clean, obeying the laws.
Recognize their authority.
Recognize their authority. Recognize their God-given right to make the rules. You know, if you don't like the 65 or 70 mile an hour speed limit, that's okay. I mean, government has a right to make that rule. I mean, I've told the city people many times down in Gillen, I think the speed limit on Gillen Drive should be about 75. But they have yet to change that. You know, now we do live in a representative government and we do have the ability to advocate for the change of those laws that we don't agree with, don't we? Even the laws that we might not morally agree with. We can advocate for changing those.
The thing about those are you have laws permitting activities that you don't agree with, but you're not forced to participate in.
Exactly. If a person wants to practice a certain lifestyle that I don't agree with, still under a free and democratic society, part of what you end up protecting is the people's rights to do things you don't agree with, as much as to do things you do agree with. Doesn't mean you have to condone it, doesn't mean you have to participate in it. I strongly, and this may sound political, but I don't think so. I think a person who runs a business has a right to decide who benefits from their business. And if somebody comes and insists on doing business with them and they don't feel like they can support that publicly, you have other options. You can go to the place down the street and get the same service from somebody that's glad to give it to you. That came up, a couple of years ago in, Seattle or Portland?
Denver.
Denver. Okay, where a gay couple asked a wedding vendor to provide services, and they said, well, we don't agree with your moral behavior, and so we respectfully, and they were very respectful about it, we respectfully declined to provide services for that activity because it would ally our business with something that we don't want to be allied with. Well, they took it all the way to Supreme Court. Supreme Court basically agreed that, if you've got the right to say no. Nobody says, if I call a plumbing company to come out and they say, well, we don't want to come to your house, I can't sue them for that. That's silly. They don't have to even tell me the reason. And a lot of times with contractors, what they do is they just don't call you back. Well, have you not had that happen? You call them and they don't call you back. Obviously, they don't want your business. Fine. But I didn't have trouble finding somebody else to do it. So, that can be less complicated than it needs to be. Anybody have any other thoughts on that one?
I'm just going to say,
Richard?
where that can get difficult is our kids, young kids and kids growing up, see that type of behavior out in public, TV, newspaper, wherever. It gets a little more difficult trying to convince them, teach them about it. It's just something we have to deal with,
But who's that on?
it's on the parents.
I mean, you got to teach your kids what's right and what's wrong.
But is it
And,
that-
it's not the government's right to enforce a particular religious point of view. In fact, I think the Constitution probably says it can't. That's the whole point of the Second Amendment. Does submission to the government involve compliance or obedience to every law that is made? This is where you get into that question. If you're in Nazi Germany in 1935 and they pass a law that says anybody who has Jewish neighbors is required by law to turn their name into the government. And you know why. You know why.
if it violates God's law,
And a lot of people in Germany, a lot of good Christian people in Germany really struggled with that question. By the way, it was either yesterday or today is National Holocaust Remembrance Day. I think it's yesterday, yeah. If you were to take 5 seconds in memory of every person who was killed during the Holocaust, it would take you 111 years to remember all of them. I want you to absorb that number. Yeah. Yes.
I think we had talked about this once before, but there's a famous story. These two girls grew up together, family friends. The two families, good friends. They stayed at each other's houses. When they invoked that law, the friend turned
Her friend in.
family in. This was in Poland. They were digging these big pits. They took that whole family out there, of course, with some other families.
Mhm.
Shot them all.
Mhm.
The little girl, somehow, even though she was shot several times, crawled out, escaped. And
She survived.
she came back after the war, back to her family's place. The girl that turned her in, that had previously been her best friend, still had to live in that same town with her for the rest of their lives. And she forgave her.
And she what?
She forgave her for turning her in, even though she was the only one out of her family to leave.
So who's the bigger person? Several times over. If you've never read the Diary of Anne Frank, you really need to. Everybody needs to read that. It is a powerful statement of what happened during that time. That's an extreme. Now that's an extreme.
I think Daniel did, I mean, he kind of proves that point whenever they made the law that you had to bow down and worship the king. He didn't make a big show of it.
He just quietly went home and went out on the balcony and
He did
prayed.
what he did. because-
And it says he went out like he did every day.
Right, he did not change.
Yeah, same time, same place, same thing. Because that's what he did. Yeah. Yep. Okay, we talked about an example or two of that. We could give many more. If the government practices taxation, do you have to pay your taxes?
Yes.
Yeah, of course. What does Jesus say? They said, should you pay taxes to the Romans? He says, bring me a coin. They brought him a coin. He says, whose picture's on it? It's Caesar's. Well, if it's Caesar's coin, he wants it back. Give it to him. It's his coin. That's worldly stuff. Doesn't matter. And we talked a little bit about that last week, didn't we? Taxes aren't always going to be used the way you want them to, either theoretically or even morally. Okay? They're not going to always use your taxes the way you think they should. The Romans, I mean, the guys who crucified Jesus on Golgotha were on the payroll. They were on the payroll. They were paid by the Romans through taxation. Nowhere does the Bible say, therefore, don't pay taxes because they pay people to kill us. He says, hey, it's their money. They didn't print it back then, but they impressed it and produced it. If it's their money and they want some of it back to maintain the government services, there's a common sense to that too that Jesus manifests. Jesus understands that a government cannot function without financial backing. You know, people don't operate governments for free. It doesn't work that way. So, now, can we, in a free society, can we debate and seek to influence how much taxation is done and how that tax money is spent?
Yes.
We can. We are the exception to the rule, right? In most parts of the world and throughout world history, that's almost never been the case. And now it's more so the case. But even now, it's kind of extraordinary. So, but yeah, you got to pay your taxes. And by the way, you have to be honest about those too. Now, can you use every loophole in the book that's there in the book?
Yes.
Sure. I mean, it's government's job to seal it tight. You know, the easiest thing for the government to do would be to say, well, the tax rate is 15% across the board on everything, everywhere that anybody under such an amount of income makes. Period. There are no exemptions, no deductions. That's your tax rate. That's the way the Romans did. There was a percentage rate, and that was required. That way you don't have to worry, you don't have to hire a whole staff of people to figure out if you're cheating or not, because all you got to do is confirm income. So, we talked about whether the taxes are suitable for you. There you go. We can argue about that all day. So, I did that backwards, didn't I? Is one form of government more acceptable to God than another? Which one does God like the best? Well, now, come on. We've all been raised kind of in the background. It's always been assumed that the democratic representative system of America is God's chosen child, right? God loves the American form of government. There wasn't even such a form on the books. Well, there was. The Greeks had a very representative form of government. Mark?
I think what we have to understand is how truly blessed we are to live under the government that we have. And understand, because we've been blessed to do this, we owe an obligation to pay that forward.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you know, from a human standpoint, do we have the best kind of government you could hope for?
Yes.
I mean, at this point in time and in history, it's extraordinary. We are so blessed that we can do what we do and say what we say. I can stand up here and say anything I want. And, you know, I'm free to do that. We can stand and disagree openly with what an official says or what the government says. And it's extraordinary that we're able to get away with that. And that it's actually sanctioned by the government in this country. What a blessing. It's extraordinary. And Mark, another thing we need to do is everything we can to see that that form of government is preserved, because it is so exceptional and so extraordinary that
That the rest of the world doesn't admire everything we do, but they certainly admire the freedoms that we enjoy.
everybody that tries to escape tries to get here, even if they hate it.
You know,
Mark?
Satan uses every situation
Absolutely.
to his gain, to try and to knock Christ down and Christians down. In an Iran or a Russia, that's easy for him to do. But it's also easy here, and it's a different, through fear and intimidation in those countries. He does it through riches here, and he causes us to be lazy rather than be punished.
You kind of drop out.
Yeah, we have to realize what's being used against us here is different from the rest of the world.
See, what I need to protect is not my money, but my freedom. You know, because without the freedom, I can't make the money. And we forget that sometimes. How blessed we are. Fred?
I think God accepts governments of all
Shapes and sizes?
But I think God is saddened by governments that exhibit cruelty to the people. I don't think God would ever be pleased with what's going on in Iran right now. Is that the government that's there? That's the government that's there. Are they doing the right thing? I don't think anybody sees they're doing the right
Have you ever read the prophets? Almost every prophetic book has a section in that book that is what is called the oracles against the nations. Now, obviously, the nations are those that surround Israel and beat up on them and pick on them. And so, you know, there's a kind of a built-in hatred for them. But look at what God condemns these nations for. Human trafficking, sex slavery, desecration of the dead, wanton murder of people for evil gain, greed, all that kind of stuff. These are the things that are condemned. Another thing that God condemns rulers for is arrogance. Look what I have done. God despises that kind of attitude. He drove Nebuchadnezzar out of the capital for 7 years and turned him into a slobbering, blathering animal, eating grass and walking naked around in the fields for 7 years, until he learned that his name was not Mr. Big Shot and acknowledged the sovereignty of God. That story in the book of Daniel is not just there for entertainment purposes. That is an object lesson for rulers everywhere. That this is the kind of attitude that God just cannot tolerate. And you look at most despots, most tyrants. This is the attitude. You know, I'm God, I'm everything, it all revolves around me. And he says, you know, what does God do? God opposes the proud. Yeah, Mark?
All right, you all understand, I work for politicians, I work around politicians all the time.
We love you anyway.
God bless you.
It's like a mission field. You know, the concept though, we put them up on a pedestal, because I'm gonna tell you, I've worked with a lot of men and women who come into office for the very first time. The hardest thing for them to grasp and to excel is how instantly people treat them like they're better, that they're smarter, that they're more capable. And I'm gonna tell you, I've had mayors look at me and say, I'm not that good. I'm not as good as people think I am. And there's a struggle there. Now, if you're framed the right way, and we have elected officials around here that are able to stay humble, but then there's that few that it goes to their head in a hurry. And that's just human nature.
Satan knows which buttons work, doesn't he?
I'm gonna tell you right now, every politician in Nashville, wherever else, Washington D.C., they put their pants on just like you and I. And we shouldn't treat them like they're royalty. We need to treat them because they're a servant, and they ought to be treated as working for us.
Well, and I think sometimes when they start acting like they're not, they probably need to be jerked down a little bit, you know. By the way, that doesn't just happen in politics, does it, Mark? Does it happen in the church? What happens when you become an elder?
You're perfect.
You're special. Well, you are perfect, right? You're perfect. You have to be. Didn't the Bible say that?
But you're under a model.
They must be the husband of one wife and perfect.
The wives are perfect good.
No, it says they have to be the husband of one wife and perfect and submissive to the will of the wife. And as long as you keep that line of demarcation clear. Hey, if you want to make it even worse, hire a preacher. And how many times have we been in churches where you have been around a preacher that thinks he's Jesus Christ? And I don't mean that sacrilegiously. Have you ever been in a church where the preacher acts like he thinks he's Jesus Christ on earth?
I've been in churches that the people in the church worship the preacher. Sure have.
And sometimes they encourage that. I'm the expert. I know everything.
Power is powerful. Power is powerful.
Leadership has a lot of trapdoors in it.
But in government too.
Yeah, but leadership of any kind has a lot of trapdoors in it. Now, if you've got, with me and the elders both, if you've got a good wife, they'll keep you humble.
That's right.
I've got a question for you.
That was a good sermon, Doug, but it wasn't that good. Yeah.
About one government for accepting God. In the Old Testament, we're showed clearly that God used countries and used governments to advance his purpose.
Even unrighteous governments.
Yes, Babylonians, the cruelty was for his benefit.
He calls Cyrus, the Persian emperor, he calls Cyrus in the book of Isaiah his Messiah, his anointed one.
So the question is that still happening today?
See, that gets into the broader question of the sovereignty of God. How much control does God have? You know, we've been reading in our daily Bible reading this week, those of you that are keeping up with that, we've been gagging on the book of Job, right? And Job keeps saying to God, why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me? No, I mean, seriously, why are you doing this to me? And they're saying, oh, you're probably saying, I don't see any more than anybody else. I don't see anybody else getting woodshedded like this. Why are you doing this to me? And the passage I just read this morning in my system of reading was where he looks up and he says, I wish God would answer me. I'm sick of, I don't want to hear anything else you jerks have to say. You guys are idiots. You don't know what you're talking about. You're clueless. I want an answer for God. And what I wrote in my comment on that was, be careful, little man, what you ask for. Because God is going to answer him. And he's going to basically blow the hair off his head. Because God is sovereign. And so there is no one form of government that's acceptable to God versus all the others that aren't. God uses whatever is there. God has always specialized in using defective material. What else has he ever had to work with? Yes, ma'am.
Well, even
Did you notice I said ma'am to her?
even in the Old Testament, in God's chosen people, the government that they have was ultimately a rejection of him. So there's
Yeah.
never been any perfect government because of our fallen world.
As I say, in a perfect world, we would all submit to God and we would not need that.
Well, let me ask you something. When the new heavens and the new earth are created, what kind of government's going to be set up?
We're a world.
No, it's real simple.
There's one king.
God's in charge.
It's going to be a theocracy,
Yeah.
which is what God intended for Israel to be. But as long as flawed people are allowed to hang around, it doesn't work. And they thought, it's interesting, God was their ruler exclusively. And what was their complaint? Yeah, but these governments around us are better than that.
They wanted a king.
Yeah, that's better. Really? Yeah. Bad move. Bad move. Could there ever be such a thing as a Christian government? Could you have a government that runs on totally on Christian principle?
I don't think so.
Could it function in the world?
Turn the other cheek, those kinds of things. That's not a. That's
You don't run up to people on December 8th, 1941 and say, hey, if a brother strikes you on one cheek, turn the other one.
Yeah, that's,
If he asks you to go 1 mile, go 2. Yeah.
I think those teachings are for people. They're not for governments.
The teachings of Scripture are for the kingdom of God. That's the theocracy. The kingdom of God means the rule of God as the Lord. The Sermon on the Mount, the moral teachings, the standards that are set on the Sermon on the Mount, that's kingdom stuff. That's what God says in the kingdom. This is the way I'm going to expect you to live. So start practicing this in this world and get yourself acclimated to these standards, because this is the way all of us are going to live when we get there. And if you don't accept and agree to live by these things here, the road's straight and the path is narrow, not many people are going to get there.
Cannot protest in heaven.
Well, you can't protest your rights in heaven, because you will have no rights in heaven. God will be Lord of Lords. Anyway, that's interesting. To what extent can a Christian engage? Now, this is interesting. To what extent can you engage in political or social actions and still remain faithful to your Christian responsibilities to be submissive to the government?
And vote.
You can vote. Fred, we're sitting on that.
You're getting back to my.
Yeah, the question you asked me about, well, what about Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and George Washington? Good Anglicans all except for Jefferson. Jefferson, I'm going to tell you something, folks. Jefferson was not a Christian. Jefferson was a pure, unadulterated humanist. In fact, he put out, if you go to Monticello, you can see the Bible that he created. He went through the Bible and used a cut and paste system and created his own New Testament, in which he took out, in which he took out all of the miracles. The birth narratives, the resurrection narrative, all of the miracles, he cut them out. He viewed Jesus as the greatest moral philosopher in history. Now somebody says, well, he wrote some stuff about God in the well, he didn't write the Constitution. That was Madison. In the Declaration, and that's true, but that was the parlance of the time to make your point. You always appealed to God, and he believed in God, but he was a humanist. He wasn't a very good Christian person. That's why for him freedom of religion was a hallmark, because he didn't want anybody imposing any religion on him. Yes.
Have you ever read George Washington's prayer journal? It's a book, here's the prayer journal handed down, and if that's true, in fact, he was a
Very devout person, yeah. He was. And John Adams was a good march in lockstep with the Anglican Church. He was a good high church practitioner. Franklin was a free spirit. I don't think Franklin believed in much of anything except having a good time. And he was an interesting old fella. Very brilliant person. He was the one person that could make everybody sit down at the table and work together.
This is a troublesome question for me, because I don't want the answer to that to be that those guys were in the wrong. But clearly, you know,
well, if you want to believe that,
revolution is not submissive.
well, if you want to believe that the establishment of the free state of the United States was in the long-range plans of God, then
And
they are party to that process.
it's interesting, I did some more reading after I sent you that email, and okay, what did church leaders say during the revolution in order to basically give their approval to the revolution? And they said that the strongest argument I found that they could come up with was Moses and the children of Israel left Egypt, okay?
Get out of slavery.
Against the government's will, okay? And so, yeah, you can make that point. I'm not sure that's the same thing as overthrowing your government.
Well, if you want to have a more interesting conversation, read the writings on both sides of the Civil War.
Yeah.
Read the writings on both sides of the Civil War, because both sides believed that they were doing exactly what God was pleased that they do. And then you had a fellow like David Lipscomb, who absolutely was a full-time, all through and through pacifist. He absolutely refused to take sides in the Civil War, and both sides knew it, and both sides greatly respected him, and the campus of David Lipscomb College at that time lay right on the borderline between the Southern and Northern armies. And Lipscomb would get in his wagon in the morning, and he would ride right through the Union and Confederate lines, right past the pickets, who said, "Brother Lipscomb, it's good to see you. How you doing today?" "Very fine. You guys take care and don't get hurt now." And he'd go right on down across the road and down to one of his fields to work. That evening, he'd pack his stuff up, come back home, say hi to the pickets in the evening, go back to his house, which at that time was on the campus of today's modern Lipscomb University. I think the house
The house is still there.
is still there, yeah.
Lipscomb, he not only was a pacifist, but he was against Christians' involvement in government in any form, not to elected office. He said the closest that a Christian could come to being involved in government was to be a teacher in a public school. Anything past that was, now, and I have to, understand where Lipscomb's coming from. He's looking out his front door, and he's seeing brother slaying brother.
He's hearing the bombs on both sides.
He's seeing war at its ugliest,
Yeah.
when brothers are against brothers. And,
Is there any part of war that's not ugly?
that's the ugliest part, but there's
Yeah.
no part that's not ugly. But I suspect that those of us who served in the military and then taught at Lipscomb, we'll have an interesting conversation with Brother Lipscomb when we get to heaven. So,
And this has been an issue in every generation where there's been World War I, World War II, the question of Christian pacifism, the question of the conscientious objectors. And you know how they got around that in World War II? They said, well, if you're a conscientious objector, then fine, we'll still draft you. We just won't give you a gun. We'll give you a medical kit, let you go drag bloody bodies off the battlefield while under heavy fire and try to save lives, but you're not allowed to use a weapon.
And a bunch of those people did remarkable jobs. as medics.
There are actually Christian medics who received the Medal of Honor for the number of lives that they saved at great risk, obviously at great risk to themselves, since you're not allowed to take up a weapon. But, you know, these kind of issues have always troubled the church. They've always troubled the church. Of course, the other side of it is, against the pacifist view is, one of the first people converted in the book of Acts was a Roman centurion. What are you going to do with that one? Did he resign from the army? There's no suggestion that he did. See the problems you get into? And part of that is when you start talking about the unity that we maintain in the church, how fine do you split those hairs? How fine do you, how sharp is your razor?
But in this society, does that mean that we protest, or that we are not allowed to protest, or how is that? I mean,
Okay.
that is more relevant in life today.
In our country, are you allowed to protest? Do you have a First Amendment right to protest? Do you have a First Amendment right to violently protest? No. If I want to stand on the side of the road and hold up a sign that tells my representative that I think he's the biggest crook and jerk I ever knew in my life, there is nothing wrong with that. I have every right to do that. Now, I think as a Christian, if I load my sign up with a bunch of vulgar profanity and things like that, then I'm not doing what a Christian. At that point, I'm not violating the civil law, I'm violating God's law. But if I want to hold up a sign that says, "You a bald-faced liar," and I don't believe anything you say, or if I want to hold up a sign that says, "Get out of town and leave us alone," or something like that, what's wrong with it?
Well,
There's nothing illegal about it.
nothing illegal, but when you do stuff, are you doing it out of love? Is that love? God is love, we're supposed to love one another, and that's what he goes on and talks about.
Okay, now, is it loving to protest an activity that is causing harm to your fellow citizens?
Yes.
Can you be motivated by that? I mean, I'll be honest, the young man that was shot a couple of days ago in Minneapolis was going over to help a lady that had been pushed down. Was all he was doing. But it was taken by some of the agents as an aggressive move, and so they responded, and I think we've seen some backlash from that. But I mean, the point is, it didn't appear that he was really wanting to provoke anything or harm anybody. He just got caught up in a bad situation. Is that unchristian? I don't see how you could say it is. Ashley?
Well, and then you have to think about scriptures like in 1 Thessalonians where Paul tells people to make it your ambition to lead a quiet life and mind your own business.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's-
And that almost goes back to Lipscomb's view of, during politically charged times, which the Civil War certainly was a little bit politically charged. Lipscomb's view was that that's the time when Christians need to just stay at home, go to church, and mind their own business. Keep their nose out of all that, because I think his philosophy was that no matter which way you go, you're going to lose people. And that's not good for the church. So, Mark?
There's a difference. I think we need to realize it's not everything has to be protest. We need to make our beliefs known.
Mm-hmm.
If all the churches, and forget which name is on the side, if all the churches all stood up and said, "We believe that this is wrong. This is our one of our core beliefs, that this is wrong." That has a huge impact on public discussion and on policies that are made and on laws that are made. And it's never an act of actually holding a picket sign or going to a protest. We're just simply standing up and saying, as Christians, we believe this behavior is wrong.
Or if we could bring all the churches together and contact the government and say, if you're wanting to have an initiative to address this issue in our community, we want you to know that all of our groups of faith are available to you to use in any way that we can to help you accomplish that. That's even more powerful, because then you're letting your light shine. People are seeing your good works. Now, here's our problem. In our particular fellowship, our people won't even work together with each other. That's a problem. And God forbid that you hold a funeral for somebody and share the pulpit with a preacher from another religious group. Now, how are you going to present a united front, Mark, with that kind of stuff? So many folks have grown up with what I call the denomination wars, that we have actually so divided and so alienated into tribes the people of God, people that claim loyalty to Jesus. It's hard to get them all to come together and agree and work together on anything. And that's where you were talking, Mark, last week about, we should be the ones that are the leaders in forging bonds of unity within our society.
I think the problem there is that they let their differences be more important than their love for Jesus, okay? That's got to be what unites us. And I am always encouraged by the fact that 2 of the 12 were Simon the Zealot, who was a revolutionary. He was rabidly anti-Roman. He was a revolutionary terrorist, if you will. And one of the other apostles worked for the government he was trying to overthrow.
And was collecting taxes to support their army of occupation.
And yet, if those guys can get along, surely we can.
I don't know.
Surely we should.
I think we're going to have to settle which translation you use first.
Surely we should.
Isn't it sad? Isn't it sad? And where does that change begin?
With me.
Has to begin with you and me. We got to get ourselves on board. Should a local church publicly engage in politics? I've already told you what I think about that, and you can think what you want. I just think we need to. Our job is to preach Jesus. My job is to, on the back of I just designed a new business card for myself, and on the back I put the 2 Thessalonian passage, or the 2 Corinthians passage, where Paul says, we made it our goal to do nothing but preach Christ to you and not ourselves. And, to me, that's what you want to say to people. You come to our church, you're going to hear me preach Jesus. That's what we're going to talk about. So anyway, thank you for all of your comments tonight. I think we've got the whole problem solved. And so I feel better now. I can go home and sleep tonight. We're never going to get all that worked out. By the way, had I not gone into ministry, I already had a commission to the Naval Academy. I was going to be career Navy. So that'll tell you how I feel about military service. That's okay. But anyway, anybody have any other thoughts? Marty? Uh-oh, now we're going to get it settled.
No, we're not. I'm not even talking about that. This is about Ukraine. Our mutual preacher friend from Alhalla that we
Yeah,
gave-
the fellow that we took the $30,000 to?
I think it was 10,000 that we gave, the church here gave to him. He's fixing to go back to Ukraine. His members are telling him, please don't go. They're getting bombed by Putin all the time. But he said he has to go. There are a number of Ukrainian ministers who need encouragement. He's also said that there are a lot of Ukrainian Bible students that are being called to go to war.
Mhm.
kinda like
Being
what you
drafted, sure.
said, And get drafted, and there, there's a lot of families, I forgot what he was asking for, but something to take over, they're trying to get, I forgot, because there's no electricity. You talk about Nashville, I mean, they will have their electricity eventually turned back on.
Yeah, they'll have
These
electricity in a
people
week.
up there
Ukraine will
are
get theirs
living
back in
with
5 years.
Nothing. They are living with nothing. And so that was one thing. Luann's husband. is-
Glenn Thomas,
Name just left me. He's having trouble with his foot. Andy can tell you more. He's had some tests today. So,
okay. So they'll be working on that.
and Dean is having a really hard time. We need
Dean's
to-
really grieving over her mother's passing. Natalie, our daughter-in-law, her father died 2 weeks ago. Her mother died Sunday. So we'll be doing that service on Friday. Please keep those girls in your prayers. Those two girls have lost both parents in 15 days. So, not unexpected given the situation, but keep them in your prayers. Yes, sir. Josh, by the way, has a birthday today. Yeah, he's 37. Feels like it. What you got, buddy?
I have a prayer request.
Okay.
I had a coworker die on Saturday. We don't know the cause yet. They're doing an autopsy, but
Okay, so you had a coworker die Saturday. Keep him in your prayers. Okay? And those of you that have been with me online might have recalled Emily Wagner, the young lady that's been writing to me. She contacted me this week. Her boyfriend was murdered by his father in a domestic fight. And she's devastated. She's devastated. And I'll tell you, I've had this girl I had this girl in school from the time she was 5 years old. I've known her and her family forever. And she is the most beautiful girl. I did the wedding for her sister, who's just had a little girl. But she is a beautiful young lady. And she's going to try to be with us Sunday. So if you see me hugging on somebody that you don't know, because I grab people and hug on them all the time, but if you see me hugging on a young lady that you don't know, that's probably Emily, and you might give her your affection because she is really wanting to connect with the Lord. Yes, ma'am?
I said, I'll introduce myself.
You'll introduce yourself. I'll give her a warning, okay? I may send her a text message and just say, listen, if a strange lady just comes up to you and starts talking, she's harmless. Hey, thank you, Nicole. We appreciate you.
Tim and Janice's girls are home with the flu.
Okay, so both the little ones, Rora and Izzy, are both sick. Okay, anybody else? Danny?
Ashley went back to work today. She's got, Friday she'll be doing internal radiation, and Friday was supposed to be the last one, but they canceled Tuesday, so that'll be next week sometime. And then she'll be done with everything.
Let's hope. Let's hope.
Yay.
And she took a fall on the ice. And
Yeah, she took the fast way down the steps.
she landed on the maximum padding area, but with what she's been through, that's a huge jar to put your body through.
And Jimmy is traumatized.
And Gemma is traumatized. Gemma's okay. All right. Anybody have anything else? It is so good to be together, isn't it? Thank you for being with us. Let's have a word of prayer and close our service. Father God, thank you for watching over us. Thank you for blessing us. Thank you for walking us day by day, step by step through all of these difficulties in life. You know, as we discuss complex issues, and this one tonight was one of many that we as Christians have to deal with, we just pray that you will give us wisdom and love for one another, and most of all, love for you and your will. Help us to be loyal to you and loyal to each other, and let everything else sort itself out around us. Bless us, Father, and help us to walk faithfully each day. We ask, as we do in all things, in the sweet name of Jesus. God's people said, Amen.